In this lesson, we'll add a sense of scale to our model by adding abstract human figures. Now, I had gone and created this very simple humanoid character that we're going to be using as our abstraction of human form. So the main reason why we're going to put this in is just to give a sense of scale to our entire design, because without it, we don't really have anything to reference it to except for the existing building. But because there is so little detail on it, we don't really know how big it is. So what we're going to do in this case is very similar to how we scattered the pavilions and how we scattered the cylindrical objects for the trees. We're just going to be using the scatter tool. The difference here is that I'm going to show you a few extra points that you can add to your workflow when using scatter, just to make it a little bit more usable and a little bit more powerful. The situations that we had before where we scattered these objects, we had single objects that we scattered them onto. What we're going to do in this case is we're going to select a few more objects. For example, we're going to choose the side on top here, and we're also going to choose some of these grassy areas at the top. So then I'm going to right click and isolate this and just make sure that you have the correct selection in front of you. Then I'm going to go and select all three objects. I'm going to make a copy of it and isolate out that copy. Now, the three objects that I have here are going to become my new distribution objects. I just need to work on them a little bit before I actually distribute that figure person onto them. So the first thing I'm going to do is just convert everything down to a simple editable poly. And then I'm going to start selecting the faces where I would like to have my figures distributed. So I'm going to, in each case, select what I want and then invert the selection to get what I don't want, to basically remove the portions that I'm not interested in. So here I'm selecting the top face. I'm just going to, again, invert the selection and delete. And in this case, where we have all these paths, I don't want people too close to the edges. I want them walking more or less in the middle. So I'm going to select all of the borders and I'm going to hit delete there as well. That's going to just leave me with a slightly smaller object. These little corners are no problem whatsoever. Next, I'm going to choose particular areas along these paths as to where I want the figures to be walking. So another good thing that you can do is you can include your camera views. So I can go in here and have a look at where my camera is positioned, so that when I go and select the faces that are going to have objects distributed on them, I can basically do a higher density closer to the camera. As far as selection goes, you may find it easier using the spray paint selection, so you can just drag your mouse around those areas for that. So where you have a higher density and a smaller size poly is where you're going to have a higher density of people as well. So just keep that in mind as you create your selections. So the difference here between what we're doing right now and what we were doing earlier on is that this is much more targeted. In other words, I'm combining objects together and then I'm selecting where exactly I want those people to be positioned. So doing this method is a little bit easier than actually positioning them manually, especially because areas on the bridge, for example, like this, are all curved, and adjusting each person in the Z direction or Z direction is incredibly complicated and time consuming. So what I could also have done if I really had no time, I wouldn't make this sub-selection. I would just go ahead and distribute the objects all over the entire surface. So after making a few more selections, I'm going to add an editable poly modifier, and I'm just going to go and invert and delete the selection. The reason why I wanted that editable poly modifier to be there is because I still wanted to be able to go back just in case I did want to have more people distributed on the entire object. You can also have a look through your camera view and see which areas you have selected and which ones have remained. So there we're going to have a little bit of a preview where the people are going to be distributed. So the object that we have here, we can also make this a little bit smaller. Let's go and use Quick Slice just to work that a little bit faster. I'm going to again delete the portions I don't want. And on the roof, I'm going to do the same thing where along the outside, I'm going to delete all those faces. So I'm just left with small portions on the inside where we're going to scatter a few people. Then I'm going to attach all of these objects together. So I'm going to attach them to those two. And I'm not worried about the material IDs because these objects will not be rendered. So now that I go back to my main view, I'm going to isolate everything together with my figure and just making sure that this is one object. You can also go and rename this. So we can call this figure scatter object. And now this person can be scattered on it. So just before I do scatter the person across, I did want to show you one extra modifier that you can add on. If I scroll down right to the bottom, it's slightly off the screen because I can't show you. If you just type XF enter, you will get an XForm modifier. And this is quite an interesting modifier to use when you do scatter, because you will be able to control the direction that the gizmo is basically pointing in. So you will have the function to adjust that gizmo and change the orientation and the position along that object that you're busy scattering. So this can sometimes be useful. I don't always use it, but it does give you an extra bit of control, and I'd like to show you that in this example. So first of all, what I'm going to do is make an instance of this person just so that I can have a copy that isn't scattered. And then that instance is now going to go onto the scatter. So go down to compound objects, scatter, and I'm just going to hide the distribution object immediately because I don't need to see it. And at the top of my list, I'm going to pick that distribution object. So now the first figure has already been scattered in place. I'm going to increase the amount of people to 100. And once they're all in place, then I can start making my other adjustments. So I'm going to undo perpendicular for the moment, and I'm just going to show you how making an adjustment on the XForm changes what happens on the actual figure in the scatter. So if I right click and go to gizmo, I can basically move that gizmo up and down, and that will adjust the figures in that direction. And if I turn the gizmo here, then you can see that all those figures are updating and turning as well. So if I had to go and turn the person lying down, all of the figures are going to adjust accordingly. So that makes it quite powerful, because instead of adjusting them within your scatter, you can just work with your instanced object on the left here, and that basically becomes a remote control for everything you're doing in your scene. So now, together with this XForm modifier, or with the scatter modifier of that XFormed object, I can now go and add a little bit of variation. So let's say a 10% variation in size of the people. I can also give a bit of variation in the direction that they're pointing in. We don't want them to lean to the side, so you just need to find the direction so that they point sideways and they look like they're going in all different directions. Then this object over here is going to become another source object, and so is the one underneath. So these two can go onto your hidden source object layer. Your scattered objects can now get a new material. So for this, we can create a new V-Ray material called people, and we can just give them an off-white color in matte. So they're just going to look like little paper or plastic figurines that are scattered around the site. So if I look in my camera views, you can start getting an idea of that scale, and if there are any in the wrong place, you can go and manually modify them by either adding an editable poly modifier or changing the distribution object underneath. So that is it for this lesson. All I wanted to do was show you those extra few tips in the scatter. And what you can also start noticing in the workflow is that we pretty much seem to be repeating the same type of methods for different types of objects. So for architecture, we used scatter. For the planting, we used scatter. And so we did the same thing for the people. And you can notice the same type of things being repeated over and over and over again. And part of a speed modeling workflow, as I have repeated several times in the course, is about doing the same thing over and over for different types of parts of your building, your architecture. So when you start to repeat steps, you always speed them up because you get more and more comfortable using them. And that's definitely a good thing to keep in mind. Get used to doing something, whatever you're comfortable working in. If you're comfortable working with splines, then work with that and get comfortable with it and repeat it again and again as you increase your speed and your efficiency. So that is it for this lesson. We're going to now jump into soon to be one of the final lessons as we start to render up our building now. And we're going to just increase our render settings even further in the next lesson as we tweak our image and adjust everything to get a good looking image. The other thing that we're going to do is a quick sun test calculation. So we're going to set up a daylight system for ourselves and have a look at how our building reacts in the morning and the afternoon, just so that we can see what it does at different times of the day. So all of that's coming up, so definitely keep tuned in, so to speak, and watch the other lessons if they do interest you, and you can definitely learn a few more tips out of this project.